Chapter 373 has finally dropped on our heads, and you guys, it was a doozy. Spoiler alert for those of you who haven't read it yet, but we got the answers to many questions we'd had in our minds since December. Like, is Gedfring alive? Is Morta fine? Has the seahorse drowned? And, most importantly, has Guts finally given in to his despair? The answers to those questions are yes, as always, no, and not yet, but as is the custom with Berserk, Chapter 373 left us with more questions than answers. The opening sequence between Serpico and Isidro hints at a darker path ahead for the latter. Shirke is currently astral projecting her body all the way to Falconia for an unsavory reunion. Guts is still struggling to come to terms with what happened at Elf, and, bafflingly enough, the chapter ends with the seahorse being boarded by what appear to be Kushan slavers. We've broken it all down in our chapter breakdown video, so head on over to Marvelous Anime to check that out. But in this video, we're looking to the future of Berserk. Chapter 373 ended with the ever-dreaded to be continued state, which means Berserk could return a month later or a year later depending on how Studio Gaga is operating these days. But until then, we thought we'd help you, our fellow strugglers, coast through the wait period by munching on some food for thought. Is Causality's grand plan for Berserk finally converging? Because the way things stand at the moment, all important characters seem to be headed for one location. That location might just lie in the east. So, without further ado, these are our predictions for what might happen in Chapter 374 of Berserk. It looks like the good guys might be gathering at one place. Find what the Kushan's arrival at the end of Chapter 373 could signify. Chapter 373 was a roller coaster of emotions and developments for multiple reasons. Shirke finally achieves her final boss status by astral projecting herself into the branches of the World Tree and traveling all the way to Falconia to presumably find and rescue Casca. Isidro is sulking because he lost his girlfriend, and Serpico of all people is the one cheering him up. Farnace, Roderick, and Magnifico are doing all they can to help the mages of Elfhelm amplify Shirke's magical ritual, and then we have Guts. The Black Swordsman continues to reel from his absolute defeat to Griffith on Skellig Island, has hit his lowest point ever in this series so far. Go watch our breakdown video on Chapter 373 for more of that, but the TLDR version is, Guts is losing ground to the Beast of Darkness at a frightening pace. And for those of you who don't know what that is or what it means, hit the subscribe bell and turn the notifications to always on because we'll be talking about it in a video very soon. But in amongst all these emotions and character development, the most interesting thing has to be the ending of the chapter. Roderick's seahorse is boarded by what appear to be Kushan slavers. We say slavers because the men who board the ship don't immediately start slaughtering people like pirates would. Kushan have a demonstrable history with slavery, even just how many Midland soldiers were turned into war slaves during Emperor Ganishka's invasion. But having brought up Ganishka, the question does beg, who sent these guys to the ship? With Ganishka's fall, there should be nothing left of the Kushan Empire anymore. We learned in Chapter 294 that all the Kushan who had followed Ganishka to Midland but disagreed with his tyranny had already gone over to Griffith's Band of the Falcon. In Chapter 334, Jareth, the only named Kushan commander of Griffith's band, claims that his people owe a great debt of gratitude to the Falcon and his subjects for taking them in, despite their recent actions against the Kingdom of Midland. This statement makes it seem like all the remaining Kushan in the world have also gathered in Falconia, but that might just be an assumption. It is possible that these slavers are remnants of the Kushan regime, who took to the high seas after the Great Roar in an effort to survive doing what they do best, or that a new power filled the vacuum left by Ganishka's departure, and these slavers are now working for them. As for how Guts & Co. would end up encountering Kushan, there is a simple answer to that in Berserk's geography. Though we never exactly get a map throughout the entire series, we loosely know that Midland lies in the middle of the continent of Man. The Kushan Empire lies to the far east, and Skellig Island lies to the far west. It's possible that when Griffith destroyed Elfhelm, the seahorse ended up going east by west and landed right in the jaws of Kushan slavers. Then there's also the possibility that these guys were sent by Griffith, because if Jareth's claims about all Kushan now being a part of Falconia are true, then Griffith sending a few of them out to subdue Guts' crew would make sense. But we think the answer is actually entirely different, and in the best possible way. When we were reading the closing stages of Chapter 373, we couldn't help but notice a peculiar character design trait that the new artists at Studio Gaga have decided to give these Kushan slavers: pupilless eyes. Now this, by itself, isn't new to the series, but that is what makes its reappearance over here such an interesting development, because the only pupilless Kushan we've seen in the series so far were the Kushan Scouts and the Bakiraka Assassin, both of whom belong to the Bakiraka clan. This tribe of warriors was banished from the Kushan Empire centuries ago for fighting on the wrong side, and they relocated to a fortress hidden somewhere deep in the mountains, choosing to live their lives in the shadows as assassins, waiting for the day when they could return home once more. The current leader of these assassins is Salat, a man who is very well acquainted with Guts and another ally of the Black Swordsman as of this moment in the story, Big Boy Rickert. Salat was last seen spiriting Rickert, Erica, and the Kushan sorcerer Daiba away from Falconia after Big Ricky executed the slap of the millennium right across Griffith's face and vowed to give him protection at that hidden fortress we spoke of just a moment ago. The fact that these pupilless Bakiraka slavers would show up and capture Guts and his comrades at this point in the story, when we're allegedly 75% of the way done, can only be a sign of one thing: causality is finally converging. If our assumption about these Kushan slavers being members of Salat's exiled clan ends up being correct, and the crew of the Seahorse is taken back to their mountain fortress just as Salat and his group arrive from Falconia, well, you have all the characters who would want to take down Griffith in one place because of that. Minus Shirke, because she's currently riding the World Tree's branches all the way to Falconia, but if she manages to come back without being trapped by, I don't know, Griffith's luscious locks of hair or something, then we will have all of the good guys gathered in one place and ready for the greatest strategy meeting of all time. Characters like Guru Gedfring and Daiba can figure out the astral tactics, while Salat, Serpico, Roderick, and the rest come up with a more conventional assault option. As for Guts, that's the biggest what if right now, because he has just had a rather harrowing encounter with his worst enemy, himself. What will happen to Guts when we see him next? Chapter 371 showed us Guts losing his emotional composure and drowning in an ocean of his own despair. For the first time in the entire series, he lets go of his sword by his own volition and thinks to himself that his entire life has been for nothing, because in the end, Griffith ended up kidnapping Casca and he couldn't even land a hit on him to save her life. Chapter 373 upped the ante by showing us the effects of this traumatic event didn't just remain constricted to his heart. They had bled into his body, mind, and soul. Guts could barely stand up in this chapter, and when he tried to lift up his sword, he ended up puking because of how badly he was reeling from everything that has happened to him. His mind projected the Beast of Darkness onto his Dragon Slayer, and started taunting him by playing to the thing he desired the most at that moment in his life: power. Guts was helpless in the face of Griffith because Griffith was a god hand, a literal divine being given flesh and form in the physical world for the sole purpose of uniting the world and leading them to eternal salvation, if you hear his side of the story. But Guts was just plain old Guts, and without the Berserker armor's powers, he had no chance in the abyss of even touching Griffith, let alone landing an actual hit. So, in his mind, Guts is still powerless, and the only thing that can help him make things right is more power. When Guts goes to lift up his sword after listening to the beast's taunts, he has a faint hallucination of Griffith standing on his blade, just like he did back when they fought for the first time. That time, Griffith was the one who defeated Guts, just like he did at Elfhelm, and what this basically means is that Guts is taking this L in the worst way imaginable. And rightfully so if you know anything about his life. The beast knows this and is ready to pounce at the first opportunity that Guts lets his guard slip. With Shirke no longer aboard the Seahorse, there is no one there to hold him back even in the slightest. And the last panel of chapter 373 does suggest that the Berserker armor is about to take full control of Guts as a trio of Kushan slavers find him incapacitated in the Seahorse's hold. Given that we seem to be following a 2-chapter, 1 POV format under Kujimori's supervision, it wouldn't surprise us to see chapter 374 open with a massive battle between the Kushan slavers and a Berserker Guts, who will finally snap and probably kill a few of his friends before being brought back to his senses. Guts is not someone who will go down without a fight, and the way he is right now, the last thing you should be doing is looking to pick a fight with him, because that's the first thing on his mind. The consequences of this fight will remain to be seen, but for our previous theory to come true, the slavers will somehow have to win against a berserker Guts, whom even Grunbeld the Flame Dragon Apostle couldn't stop. But we think that could also be prevented from happening altogether. Out of all the people being taken captive in the panels we saw in chapter 373, 2 people were missing, and they're the only ones who can probably fight off the Kushan whilst ensuring Guts remains sane. Isidro and Serpico can easily hold their own against a few measly slavers after having fought all kinds of astral nightmares, so it's possible that they will help keep Guts at bay and work out a deal or something to that effect to ensure that no one important dies on the way to the Bakiraka hideout. And then we also have Farnese and Gedfring and Morta, who can possibly cast their luminous bodies into the Berserker armor and stop its onslaught before it even begins. So there are a few different avenues that can prevent Guts from absolutely losing his dome inside of a floating death trap. But you know Berserk's motto, just when you think things can't get worse, they most certainly will get worse. So you know Guts going crazy is where we're gonna put our money. But speaking of Guts going crazy, where will chapter 374 actually pick up? Before his tragic passing, Miura-sensei mentioned that he was building up towards the ultimate rematch between Guts and Griffith for the final arc of his dark fantasy masterpiece. But he didn't exactly mention how we would get there or when, which is understandable, obviously, because that's giving your whole story away. But it also makes predicting where the next chapter will open up a bit trickier than usual, because Berserk has a few POV characters it likes to focus on outside of just Guts and Griffith. For example, Luca was a big part of the Conviction arc, with entire chapters devoted to just her being the bestest of best girls, and doing the right thing just because she felt like it. Rickert and Salat have also shared the mantle of POV character at alternating times, and so have Serpico, Isidro, Farnese, and pretty much any character that is truly important to the overarching storyline of Berserk. But overall, there are realistically only 2 places that the story can pick up in the next chapter. Either on the Seahorse to show us the immediate aftermath of chapter 373's cliffhanger, or in Falconia, because that's where every important side character that isn't with Guts is presently located. There is a slim chance that we might see Rickert, Erika, Daibus, Salat, and the Tapasa arrive at the Bakiraka hideout, but that will be a small section of the chapter, and probably not the full chapter itself, since Miura is no longer writing the story. If we open with the Seahorse, then that would be in keeping with Berserk's recent trend of giving us 2 chapters from the 2 most important perspectives of the story. But if we go to Falconia, then things become interesting, because if you recall what Griffith said at the end of chapter 372, then that will make causality seem even more inevitable. Chapter 372 ended with Griffith saying he wanted to head to the east for some kind of important demonic mission. We're guessing it's a demonic mission at least, because he only says this to his most trusted war demons, but hey, more surprising things have happened in Berserk. Maybe Griffith just wants to buy another trinket from those mystical eastern bazaars of Berserk that were being set up as the source of Behelits very early on in the story. Or maybe he's on his way to take out the last pocket of resistance to his eternal rule in the future, the Bakiraka clan. This is because Griffith must already be aware of the conversation between Jareth and Salat, where the latter claimed that he will judge for himself whether he wants to join the world that the Falcon of Light is creating. And if you know anything about Griffith, then you know that that's something he cannot have you doing. Free will doesn't exactly mesh with his idea of world domination, so it only makes sense that he might be targeting what is quite possibly the only pocket of free will that exists in the world in Salat's kinsman. If all of our assumptions come true, then causality will have proven its absolute nature, because it will truly converge all important players' destinies into a single point in time and space, dedicating all of it to unparalleled slaughter. Berserk is a tale that began in blood, and with blood it shall end. But whether that begins in chapter 374 is what our biggest question is, and if any of our predictions come true, then the answer to that question is an emphatic yes. Marvelous verdict. But as for this video, that's gonna have to be it. Chapter 374 is low-key the most anticipated chapter in Berserk's entire existence for us because the series has never felt this dismal before. And yes, we might just be slightly sadistic for enjoying that kind of storytelling. After chapter 364, this has to be the best cliffhanger ending we've seen in the story. And we say that because as of now, there is no news on when Berserk will be back in publication. Chapter 373 ended with the dreaded "to be continued" tag, and so far, there has been no announcement regarding the future of the series, except the fact that Volume 42 is going to be coming out in September this year. Considering the 2 volumes before this had about 9 chapters each, the same amount of chapters that remain unvolumized following Miura's passing, it is probably safe to assume that Volume 42 will end with Chapter 373. Berserk has a knack for not releasing a new chapter until the volume before it has been published, so we could end up waiting for the rest of the year for another 20 pages or so of content from Studio Gaga, but it'll be worth the wait. If you guys don't want to miss out on any information about updates on the next chapter, then don't forget to subscribe to Marvelous Anime and turn that notification bell to always. Until then, we'd love to hear your thoughts on our predictions in the comments down below, and we'll see you guys in the next one.